The Weight of Memory, a story by Carl Otto. Arthur Kessler's arthritic fingers fumbled with the latch on his pill organizer, the plastic case a stark reminder of his frailty. Sunlight filtered through dusty curtains, casting long shadows across the faded wallpaper of his modest apartment. Family photos lined the mantel, their smiling faces a sharp contrast to the emptiness that now filled his home. "Damn thing," Arthur muttered, his once commanding voice now thin and frail. The organizer finally opened with a soft click, spilling an array of colorful tablets onto the dining room table. He sighed, carefully sorting them into neat piles. As he reached for his glass of water, Arthur's gaze fell on a framed photo of a young woman, Suzanne, his granddaughter. The last time he'd seen her would 4 years ago, maybe 5. The memories blurred together, like watercolors left in the rain. "I'm sorry, mein Schatz," he whispered, his German accent, long suppressed, slipping through in moments of emotion. "I tried to make things right." Arthur pushed himself to his feet, joints creaking in protest. He shuffled towards the kitchen, leaning heavily on his cane. The tile floor felt cold and hard even beneath his padded slippered feet, each step a reminder of how far he'd fallen from the strong, vital man he once was. As he reached for the refrigerator door, a wave of dizziness washed over him. Arthur's vision swam, the kitchen tilting at impossible angles. He tried to steady himself, but his cane slipped on the smooth floor. Time seemed to slow as Arthur fell. He saw the edge of the kitchen counter, rushing towards him, heard the clatter of his cane hitting the floor. Then pain exploded in his hip as he landed hard on the unforgiving tile. "Hilfe!" he cried out instinctively, then caught himself. "Help! Somebody, please!" But there was no one to hear, no one to come to his aid. Arthur lay there, breath coming in ragged gasps, the cold of the floor seeping into his bones. He tried to move, to pull himself towards the phone on the wall, but every motion sent shards of agony through his hip. As the initial shock faded, a deeper, more insidious fear began to creep in. How long would he lie here before someone found him? Days. The thought of dying alone, helpless on his kitchen floor, brought tears to Arthur's eyes. "I don't want to die," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Not like this. Not alone." A soft sound caught his attention, a whisper, so faint he might have imagined it. Arthur's eyes darted around the kitchen, searching for its source. There, in the corner by the pantry, he saw something, a shimmer in the air, like heat rising from summer pavement. But it was more than that. For just a moment, Arthur could have sworn he saw a face forming in the distortion. He blinked to clear his vision, and the shimmer was gone. But the feeling of being watched remained, prickling at the back of his neck. As Arthur lay there, helpless and afraid, his mind began to wander, drifting back to another time. Years earlier, Arthur adjusted his tie nervously as he approached the bustling backyard. Laughter and music drifted over the fence, a stark contrast to the knot of anxiety in his stomach. He clutched a small gift box wrapped in shimmering silver paper. "You shouldn't be here," a voice hissed. Arthur turned to see his daughter, Lisa, her face a mask of barely contained anger. "It's Suzanne's graduation," Arthur said softly. "I couldn't miss it." Lisa's eyes darted around, checking if anyone had noticed them. "I told you not to come. You're going to ruin everything." Before Arthur could respond, a delighted squeal cut through the tension. "Opa!" Suzanne, radiant in her blue graduation gown, rushed towards them. She threw her arms around Arthur, nearly knocking him off balance. "You came!" she exclaimed, her eyes shining with joy. Arthur's face lit up, years seeming to melt away from his weathered features. Of course, mein Schatz. I wouldn't miss this for the world. Lisa's lips pressed into a thin line, but she said nothing as Suzanne led Arthur into the party. Arthur smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. He handed his granddaughter the small box. A little something to celebrate your achievement. Suzanne unwrapped it eagerly, gasping as she revealed a delicate silver locket. Oh, Opa, it's beautiful. It belonged to your great-grandmother, Arthur explained, his voice thick with emotion. I've been saving it for this day. As Suzanne hugged him again, Arthur caught sight of Lisa watching them, her expression unreadable. He remembered a time when she would have reacted the same way to his gifts. Before she knew. The afternoon wore on, and Arthur found himself seated at a table with some of Suzanne's friends. They were curious about him, asking about his accent and his life. For a while, he lost himself in telling sanitized stories of his youth, dating back to the 1950s. Wow, Mr. Kessler, one of the boys said, you've lived through so much history. Arthur's smile faltered for a moment. Yes, perhaps too much. A commotion near the house drew their attention. Lisa was arguing with her husband, their voices carrying across the yard. He can't stay, David. You know what he did. It's Suzanne's day, David responded, trying to keep his voice down. Can't we just… No, Lisa snapped. I won't have him here, pretending everything's normal, not after what he did. Arthur's heart sank. He looked around the table, seeing confusion and curiosity on the young faces. Suzanne appeared at his side, her earlier joy replaced by concern. Maybe I should go, Arthur said quietly, moving to stand. No, please don't, Suzanne pleaded, placing a hand on his arm. She turned to the table. I'm sorry, would you excuse us for a moment? As they walked to a quieter corner of the yard, Arthur could feel the weight of his past pressing down on him. He'd tried so hard to be a good grandfather, to make amends in whatever way he could. But some sins, it seemed, were too great to be forgiven. Opa, Suzanne said, her voice gentle, I know Mom and Dad are upset, but I want you here. You've always been there for me. Arthur felt tears prickling at the corners of his eyes. Oh, mein Schatz, you don't know how much that means to me, but perhaps it would be better if I left. I don't want to cause any more trouble. Suzanne's jaw set in a determined line, so reminiscent of Lisa at that age. This is my graduation, and I want you here. They'll just have to deal with it. As she led him back to the party, Arthur felt a complex mix of emotions: love for his granddaughter, shame for his past, and a deep, aching sadness for all he had lost and could never regain. The rest of the party passed in a blur. Arthur sat quietly, watching Suzanne celebrate with her friends, treasuring what he feared might be his last moments with her. As the sun began to set, he made his way to the gate, unnoticed by most of the guests. Leaving so soon, Arthur turned to see Suzanne, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. It's late, mein Schatz, and I'm a tired old man, he said softly. Suzanne hugged him fiercely. I love you, Opa, no matter what. As Arthur walked away, those words echoed in his mind. If she knew, he thought, what would she think of him? The memory faded, leaving Arthur alone with his thoughts. He blinked, disoriented, as the familiar surroundings of his small apartment came into focus. How long had he been lost in his memories? Minutes? Hours? Arthur's breath came in shallow gasps as he lay on the cold kitchen floor. The pain in his hip had dulled to a persistent throb, but a new, more insidious discomfort was creeping in. The chill of the tile, seeping into his bones, the stiffness of lying immobile for too long. He blinked, trying to clear his vision. The kitchen seemed to waver, like a mirage in the desert. Was it the pain, or something else? Arthur squinted, his eyes straining in the dim light. There, by the pantry, a shadow, darker than the surrounding gloom. At first, Arthur thought it might be a trick of the light, a product of his fear-addled mind. But as he watched, the shadow seemed to solidify, taking on a vaguely human shape. Arthur called out, his voice cracking, "Who's there?" The figure didn't respond. It stood motionless, a silhouette against the faded wallpaper. Arthur's heart raced, pounding so hard he could feel it in his temples. "Please," he whispered, "if someone's there, help me." The shadow remained still, but Arthur could have sworn he heard something. A soft sound, like a distant whisper. He strained his ears, trying to make out words. I can't hear you," Arthur said, his voice trembling. "Please, speak up." The whisper grew louder, but no clearer. It was as if multiple voices were speaking at once, overlapping and intertwining until they became an unintelligible murmur. A chill ran down Arthur's spine as a terrible thought occurred to him. He knew those voices. Somehow, impossibly, he knew them. "9," he breathed, shaking his head in denial. "You can't be here. You're not real." The shadow flickered, like a candle flame in a draught. For a moment, Arthur thought he saw features forming in the darkness. Hollow eyes, gaunt cheeks, mouths open in silent screams. The shadow paused, hovering at the edge of Arthur's vision. The whispers faded to a soft hum, like the buzzing of insects on a summer evening. For a moment, Arthur dared to hope that it might retreat. But the memories kept coming, as relentless as the tide. One memory in particular pushed its way to the forefront of his mind. A day that marked the beginning of the end of his carefully constructed new life. Arthur Kessler straightened his tie, taking a deep breath before entering the boardroom. At 55, he was no longer the young, ambitious man who had first joined Steinhardt and Associates 2 decades ago. The years had taken their toll, etching deep lines around his eyes and mouth, sprinkling silver through his once dark hair. "Kessler," Mr. Steinhardt nodded curtly as Arthur took his seat. "Let's hope your quarterly report is more impressive than last time." Arthur felt a familiar knot of anxiety tighten in his stomach. He'd been struggling to keep up with the younger, more aggressive brokers for years now. Every meeting felt like a battle. Every quarter, a war he was slowly losing. As he began his presentation, Arthur could feel the weight of scrutiny from his colleagues. Their eyes bored into him, judging every hesitation, every stumbled word. He pushed on, his accent thickening with stress as it always did. And as you can see from these projections, Arthur paused, noticing 2 younger associates whispering something about rumors they had heard about him. Then they noticed his gaze and fell silent, looking uncomfortable and a little intimidated. The room suddenly felt too small, too warm. Arthur loosened his collar, trying to focus on the figures before him, but the numbers swam on the page, replaced by other images: barbed wire fences, skeletal figures, piles of shoes. "Kessler," Mr. Steinhardt's sharp voice cut through the haze. "Are you quite all right?" Arthur blinked, realizing he'd stopped mid-sentence. "Yes, my apologies. As I was saying..." He stumbled through the rest of the presentation, acutely aware of the side-eyed glances and poorly concealed smirks. As the meeting adjourned, Arthur gathered his papers with trembling hands. "A moment, Kessler," Mr. Steinhardt called as the others filed out. Arthur's heart sank. He knew what was coming. "Arthur," Steinhardt began, his tone uncharacteristically gentle, "you've been with us a long time, but lately, well, your performance hasn't been up to our standards." "I understand, sir," Arthur said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'll do better, I promise." Steinhardt sighed. "It's not just about the numbers, Arthur. There have been rumors, complaints from some of the younger staff about your past." Arthur felt the blood drain from his face. "Sir, I don't want to know," Steinhardt cut him off. "What you did or didn't do before you came here. It's not my business, but it's affecting your work, and it's affecting morale." "Please," Arthur said, desperation creeping into his voice. "This job is all I have. I'll work harder. I'm sorry, Arthur," Steinhardt said, not unkindly, "but I think it's time for you to consider early retirement. For everyone's sake." As Arthur left the office, briefcase clutched to his chest like a shield, he felt the weight of 1,000 stares. In every face, he saw accusation. In every whisper, he heard condemnation. He had tried so hard to outrun his past, to build a new life, but no matter how far he ran, the shadows always caught up.